Hello, welcome to the channel and my blog. I'm Adam and I'm going to get a bit personal into why, even if we have no free will, I don't particularly think it matters in our personal lives or in considering ethics. So this is my own personal take on the issue and the implications for ethics, so please stick with it, as I think this will hopefully reconcile the two camps of determinists and free will advocates, which seems crazy, but stay with me and you'll see what I mean. So in this video, I'm going to outline a way in which we can fully accept a determined universe, yet live a life of choice. And I'll also touch on if we can hold individuals morally responsible. So let's get to it. I don't want to go too far into the dry definitions of these terms. There's a lot of great videos out there on the subject of defining libertarian free will, determinism, compatibilism, non-compatibilism, and all that. I've put up my slide here for a few minutes to give an idea of these concepts, and I've posted a few links in the description. I particularly recommend carneades.org, so check him out. But anyway, just a little background to give you some context. I'm Adam Clarke, and I've had an on-off relationship with philosophy for about 20 odd years now, a little shy of that. I studied philosophy and graduated at the University of Reading in 2008. I then went through a decade or so of menial jobs working on private projects, including a truly terrible time travel novel, before self-publishing my first serious philosophical work on the abolition of the state in 2018, which is kind of a work in progress at the same time, if that makes sense. Until a few months back, at the end of 2020, I was about 20 stone in weight, and then I cut out the carbs in early 2021, started running quarter and then half mile jogs 3 times a week. A couple of months later, coming up to the present of making this video, and a couple of stones later as well, I upped this to 5 jogs a week at 3 milers and 2 rest days at 2 miles each. So the weight just keeps falling off, which is a good thing for me, I guess. But the relevant question here then is, was this lifestyle change a choice? So was free will involved, or were my choices determined? I'm making this personal as this is what I know about my own life. It's what I know, so it's easy to talk about. According to one hard determinist account of my life in the last couple of decades, I was always destined to perform these acts, given a certain causal chain of events that led me to them that extended even long before my birth, and arguably even to the beginning of the universe, or at least the initial causal position. That one day in February 2021, I suddenly decided that enough was enough, and I dragged my ass out that morning up the road on my first jog. It was still not a choice in the strictest sense. What it could accurately be described as is a desire. A desire and its attendant thoughts occurred to me, and I felt compelled to act. And I did, and I am still acting now. So similarly, my road to university and educating myself about philosophy and producing my own work didn't emerge from nothing, but was arguably determined by other causes preceding those actions. Just to carry on a little bit more of my own story, I left school with no qualifications, so not one. I didn't have any GCSEs or diploma. Got my basic secondary education qualifications at about 18, 2 years later than most in my country, so I'm English. I went to university 3 years later than my peers. What's weird is that what occurred to my 17-year-old mind, or changed it to the extent that I decided to go back to school and take that path, is ultimately a mystery to me. What I can say for certain is that I again had a desire and then thoughts. But that's a world away from claiming I chose the desire itself, isn't it? At the time, I was just given up for a lost cause by my family. I never went to school. I hated it. I never fit in. I never fitted in. I was, and am to a lesser degree now, misanthropic. How could I possibly go to college and then university if I couldn't even hack school? Perhaps this lack of belief in me sparked a positive reaction that desired to buck the trend. Who knows? But even then, it's a long time ago for me. I'm 36 now, so it's a good almost 20 years ago. But when all these thoughts were rushing through my head, I haven't got perfect memory. All I can really accurately say about this theory is that external factors influenced me and formed my desire to prove everyone wrong and achieve what they thought I couldn't achieve. But this cause was still uncaused by me. It was just a desire that I had. I didn't choose to have that desire or choose to have that want. It was a want that was present, arguably influenced by external factors which I happened to act on. We can do this with everything too. So it's true that no one chooses their desires any more than they choose to breathe, to urinate, or to react with fear when a car's about to knock you down and jump out of the way. It's just natural. Yet while it's true I don't choose to want to be healthy right now, or I don't choose to want to educate myself and to contribute to philosophy in my own small way, you, and we are unique as far as we know in being aware of the process and the implications of such actions and desires. What do I mean? Well, in a hard deterministic universe where every action we have, are, and will take is effectively already set, we as individuals are at least aware of this reality, a fact itself predetermined at the initial expansion too, maybe. This awareness matters, as it's also true to say that though we all may be aware that we are ultimately simply self-aware vessels of unchosen desires, actions and outcomes, this shouldn't influence us into despondency or inaction. Awareness of the determined universe doesn't necessarily translate into knowledge of all outcomes itself, and probably never will. Your life can still be one of deep happiness and fulfillment, with these ends actually those already prescribed to begin with. You just don't know. We simply can't know. That choice in this universe is ultimately an illusion is also effectively irrelevant to us as individuals, and even as societies, I'd argue, as the causal veil of ignorance, to reluctantly use a Rawlsian term, covers every one of us and likely always will. To live one's life as if we do have a free choice, as if we do have free will, makes more sense than the opposite, given what we know about personal and societal outcomes, which is effectively nothing. To crystallise this idea further, we can also throw into the mix a little Pascal's wager, but a more useful and life-affirming version, at least in my opinion. For those who may not know, Pascal's wager is an argument in favour of God's existence from the French philosopher Blaise Pascal. But don't worry, I'm not going to go into that here. I'm not going into arguments for God's existence or anything like that. Clarke's wager, named for yours truly if you want to call it that, has nothing to do with God, but more about common sense belief in ourselves and each other based on our personal and collective ignorance of the determined universe, assuming it is determined. Pascal believed that choosing to believe in God is preferable to not believing, given that belief potentially translates to an eternity of bliss and thus gain in heaven, whereas choosing not to believe could either result in an eternity of hell or simply oblivion. The affirmative choice would appear the best course given the probabilities. Similarly, acting towards self-actualization, acting as if you have a particular desire, or even in spite of certain desires that you may have, makes far more sense to me, given we can never know the end of our own efforts, let alone the entire system itself. What determinists and the pessimistic among us often overlook is that, yes, our actions, desires, and ultimate ends may very well be determined. However, those ends may very well be what we perceive as good. Paradoxically then, by choosing to eat vegetables rather than pizza, by choosing to go for that 3-mile run rather than stay bundled up in bed, by choosing to ask that crush for their number rather than shrink away through fear of rejection, to get outside of myself a bit, you may actually be revealing your own determined self-actualization, that path you're capable and set to take. The point here is that no one really knows what will happen. The universe's ultimate determinism then should not translate into pessimism or nihilism. From a consequentialist or ends-based perspective, it simply makes more sense to act in affirmative ways, and as if you can change things for the better than not to. So just to summarise so far, if you want a succinct principle, here it is. Act on those desires which are in accordance with a life of self-actualization, as the benefit of doing so outweighs not doing so, based on what we all know as individuals, which is almost nothing. We can't know the future. We can't know the causal chains that we're all enmeshed in. So let's break this down. We all have desires and thoughts, obviously. This we can mostly agree on. So in my opinion, Descartes was actually wrong. The most we can strictly say is that there is thought, there is desire, and there is emotion. Yet we acknowledge the existence of these, and there is universal agreement that individuals are aware of these desires, thoughts, and emotions, even if they are determined. That is, we experience them, but we don't necessarily choose them. Since we're all aware of these bodily states, we can understand and consciously react to them too. So another true thing to say is that we sometimes have competing desires. In fact, all of the time, I'd venture to say. Personally, I sometimes desire to eat unhealthy but tasty foods like takeaway pizza or Chinese curry, sweet and sour chicken balls being a particular favourite of mine. I don't choose to want these things. The desire is merely existent on occasion. But I also desire to be healthy, and further still desire and want to be as healthy as I can be. A form of self-actualization. I want to be the best that I can be physically. As well as being aware of my competing desires, I'm also aware and can understand that I, you, and all individuals have talents and potentialities that can be striven towards. This is where self-actualization comes in. Self-actualization is the realization of those latent talents and potentialities which exist in all people, all persons. It's the highest level of psychological development on Maslow's hierarchy of needs. For those who don't know, this idea came from a 1943 paper by Abraham Maslow called A Theory of Human Motivation. At the bottom of the pyramid here we have basic needs, starting with the physiological, such as food, water, rest, warmth and such. Breathing, I'd say, is another basic physiological need, obviously. Then we rise to security, so you want safety and that kind of thing. Once in the centre, we get into more psychological needs that build on top of those basic needs, as you can see, and then at the pinnacle of the structure itself, we have self-actualization. Note that it states including creative activities, so it takes into account that not all individuals necessarily feel fulfilled by pursuing dreams of being an artist or a writer, say. I could broaden the definition explicitly by arguing that to reach this stage is highly subjective and somewhat unique to each individual, and that even if you don't know right now exactly what those potentialities within you are, you can take steps towards finding out, and that too is actually part of self-actualizing. Self-actualization is more a process than an end, although it's kind of both at the same time, which is just to unintentionally confuse things here. So to consciously act on those desires that are in accordance with your self-actualization is actually to partake in said self-actualization as well. Into this heady brew of ideas, it might be helpful to mix in another, older term too. So eudaimonia or eudaimonia. I deliberately selected this term precisely because it's variously translated. It's quite ambiguous. So more recently, there's been a movement away from the simple translation of happiness. So eudaimonia is just happiness, with the roots of the word eu meaning well and daimon meaning spirit, which had given way to other translations such as living well or flourishing. Again, I recommend watching carneades.org's great video on this very subject, which I'll also link in the description. You should really also subscribe to him. It's a brilliant channel generally. So taking these later descriptions, by consciously acting on those unchosen desires that are in accordance with your self-actualization, as opposed to those that aren't, is to live eudaimonistically, if that's even a word. By doing so, you feel purpose and fulfillment more so than if you do not. Note here, nothing in what I've said contradicts even a hard determinist's conviction. I'm not claiming our acts result from free will, but I am saying that to act as if we do have free will, even if it's an illusion, to act as if we do, given we can never know the immediate effects of our acts and unchosen desires, thoughts, etc., that is preferable to not doing so, given the benefits of achieving that eudaimonia, that kind of inner fulfillment that will make you happy, and that such decisions can still conform to the unknown, determined and ultimate state of things, which no one knows anyway. And that's that, really. So I'm quietly confident that I've shown, at least in principle, how we can fully accept a determined universe and yet live a life of choice and fulfillment. I don't particularly think it matters on a personal and immediate level, just living in the moment. So what about the final issue then? How can we hold individuals morally responsible? How can we do that in a strictly determined universe? Well, strictly we can't really. I mean, we can still justify action against individuals based on our helpful causal veil of ignorance. Just as we can never personally know how our lives will pan out, even if we know that they are determined in some way, and so practically speaking should act on those unchosen desires that promote our own personal eudaimonia, we can also never know in the moment how others will act either. What is strictly true to say is that in a hard deterministic universe, an individual's ultimate life path and actions were already set long before they were even born. That they were set is not the same as knowing the ins and outs of that path. Every individual is a potentiality in this respect up to the point that their story ends. However, we do live amongst those that not only act on those desires that don't promote their own self-actualization, but also act to impede, sometimes permanently so as well, like for example murder, another's potential self-actualization. So in those circumstances we can, in a sense, identify at least the immoral act, insomuch that it acts contrary to the best way that you can act, that is, in the way that is self-actualizing. So before we close things up, let's apply this to certain desires and acts. For this we must borrow terminology and concepts from the German philosopher Immanuel Kant, specifically the categorical imperative, as well as the Greek philosopher Socrates. Firstly, applying Kant then, the form of the categorical imperative I think is useful to think about here is this one. So, act as if maxims of your action were to become, through your will, a universal law of nature. The spirit of this principle is the implication of universality and the potential of it thusly being applied to the actor. So a murderer murders, permanently ending another's ability to self-actualize, but implied within the act itself, barring any valid justification of it, is the acceptance that the murderer can be murdered. But where does Socrates come in then? Well, one astonishing claim put forward by him, which on the surface seems counterintuitive and kind of crazy, is that it's actually better to suffer an injustice than to commit an injustice. Socrates believed that when we commit an injustice, we harm our own soul, or true self, whereas to suffer injustice was merely to endure harm to our possessions, which could include wealth, reputation, or our bodies, which he didn't necessarily equate with the self. Those who suffer an injustice, according to him, have not had their souls harmed, which is far worse. What am I getting at here then? So, well, once again, in the spirit of this sentiment, if one acts in a way that affects another's ability to self-actualize, then you also act against your own ability to self-actualize too. Firstly, given it's inconsistent, as Kant's principle states, to expect others not to act similarly towards you, but for you to somehow have an arbitrary exception to it, so you can murder but no one can murder you. Doesn't make a lot of sense, it's inconsistent. And secondly, in the Socratic sense, given that to act in such a way damages what I would term the self rather than the soul. But how is this? Well, firstly, in a purely practical sense, given that if you're caught committing a certain act, then even if you're not morally responsible in a determined universe, it would still be wise for you to be removed from that society to avoid doing harm to others. This would make the thief, murderer, sexual assaulter, or whatever it is, a tragic, perhaps even pitiable individual, but dangerous nonetheless, and a potential harm to other people who aren't committing such acts. It would be hard, or harder, we should say, to self-actualize in a prison cell or when you're executed in other countries. Secondly, and more abstractly, it damages the perpetrator at a deeper level in a similar way to what Socrates was talking about. So for any healthy individual, it could be difficult to self-actualize with a mind aware of itself and its own memories of dishonesty, injustices and such. I mean, generally speaking, immoral individuals are going to find it hard, within themselves, to develop any true discipline or self-respect, and those relationships and bonds that are a prerequisite to achieving self-actualization on Maslow's hierarchy of needs. This is what I think my approach has in common with the Socratic principle from before. So I think this video is probably long enough by now. Hopefully I've shown how even in a fully determined universe we can each live perfectly moral and fulfilling lives. But am I wrong? Have I missed something, and what do you think? So write your thoughts in the comments below, and I shall see you very soon in the next one. So this was interesting for me, and hopefully I'll get some great ideas back and some great feedback. Let me know what you think, and I shall see you very soon. This is Adam, signing out.